This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors with Hiking Bob podcast. I'm your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, where you can find my social media. You can find my previous podcast, my photography website. You can also send me an email with the contact me link there. And if you have any questions or comments about anything, feel free to ask them there. And also sign up for my free newsletter, which comes out about once a week. And you can, find out about things that I didn't get a chance to talk about in my podcast and other information like that, and that's for free. And also you can support this podcast at Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob, and help support this podcast. Today, I'm excited about this podcast. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and we had to get all the scheduling to work out and everything. But I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Jason Herbert from the U.S. Forest Service with the Pike-San, Isabel, Comanche, and Cimarron Grasslands National Forest. I always have to make sure I get all those in at least once in the podcast. And Dr. Herbert is unique in the Forest Service that he is a tribal liaison. We're going to find out what all of that is about. Jason, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Bob. I'm so excited to be here. This is gonna be fun. I love talking about our forest and national grasslands here in Colorado, and Western Kansas is also got to give some love out there because our grasslands go out there, and also about Native history and stuff. So I'm looking forward to talking today.
I'm so excited to have you on here because, correct me if I'm wrong, you are like the one, or maybe there's a couple of you that are tribal liaison. How many? We've never heard of this position. You're the first one I know definitely here for that position. But how many tribal liaison or tribal relations specialists, I think you also told me you can be called, are there in the Forest Service?
I was in a meeting earlier today, and I had that question. I was like, hey, I'm going to talk to Hiking Bob today. It's going to be a lot of fun. And got some ideas and things like that. Like, I wonder how many of us there are. And we don't really know. I can tell you this, Bob. I am actually. So I serve you listeners, the taxpayers, here at Pike-San, Isabel National Forest and Cimarron and Comanche National Grasslands, and I am the very first person to inhabit this particular role of tribal liaison. And whereas I'm the first person out here at our national forest and national grasslands, I'm certainly not the first person working in the Forest Service or in our federal government. There are other positions like mine spread throughout the federal government, whether you're talking about national forests, there are other folks in national forests, but also, as you can probably imagine, in our amazing national parks department or Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, things like that, and for good reason. Wherever you go in the United States, this is indigenous lands. This is indigenous landscapes. We're talking about lands that have been lived upon for time immemorial, well before the United States. And so recently there has been a renewed focus on the part of the federal government under the Biden administration to really do a better job communicating with indigenous stakeholders, people who have claimed these lands, who have lived on these lands and continue to live on these lands and call them home, like I said, for time immemorial. So that's really my job out here, is to be out here and, really, and we can flesh this out in a bit, but really kind of ensure that Native voices are being heard in the administration of our national grasslands, forests, landscapes, and so forth.
Well, let me start off real quick with your background, because
Sure.
I'm looking at your bio here. You have a PhD from the University of Minnesota with a focus on indigenous and environmental history. Two really interesting pieces there. And I think when it comes to the Forest Service, I can understand how they both mesh in there with what you're doing. I mean, the Forest Service is, as many of us know, but a lot of people may often forget, their first priority obviously is resource, protecting the resource. Although we like to think they're there to provide playgrounds and recreation for us. That's a side thing, actually.
You can do both. Yeah.
And then the indigenous part of this, I think, is really, really fascinating to me. Is this your first position with the Forest Service? Have you been a Forest Service employee for many years? Did you step into the Forest Service because this type of position opened up?
So those are great questions. And maybe I can backtrack a little bit to how I kind of came across with my education and kind of where I went from there. So you're absolutely right. I actually went back to school later on in life and got my PhD from the University of Minnesota with a focus, like I was saying, on Indigenous environmental history. I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation, and I'm currently in the process of writing my first book, actually about how the introduction of cattle into Florida in the late 16th century changed relationships between Native people, settlers, Africans and later African Americans, change all those relationships, as well as change the landscape itself, and to a degree the animals, from the late 16th century throughout the 19th century. And kind of the argument that I make is like cattle become key to controlling Florida. And if you want to know more about that, I've got about 250, 300 pages for you here in a couple of years once that's ready. So I wrote my dissertation on that at the University of Minnesota. I was writing about this, really kind of focusing on early Seminole history, and was really blessed with the opportunity to serve the Seminole tribe of Florida for the better part of 3 years, helping them with a project. And it was, I can tell you, for me, it was the single greatest experience. And I always tell people this, and I really do mean it. Aside from, being a dad to my 2 little boys, serving the Seminole tribe of Florida was really the greatest honor of my life. I'm not a native guy. I'm from Kentucky originally. I just grew up, fishing and hunting and things like that, hiking and things. So it was a real honor to be able to go and be able to serve the tribe and learn history and share history and things like that. And once that contract ended, I got a chance to work a little bit for the Eastern Band of Cherokees. I'm actually rocking a shirt, if you can see right now, that is from the Museum of the Cherokee People, which is in Cherokee, North Carolina. Got some great friends of mine who are over there. Shayna Bushyhead Condell is the executive director, just a great friend of mine. And then I was approached is probably, I went to work for the Forest Service here as the Tribal Liaison. And it was a real exciting thing, because the one thing I really enjoyed doing was working with elders when I was working either for the Seminole tribe or anyone else. And this kind of goes back to growing up in Kentucky. I love my grandparents, and the opportunity to come out here and learn new tribal histories, really learn the histories of a new space. I've only been out here since about August. So I'm really learning this amazing, diverse landscape out here in Colorado and Kansas, and a little bit more, New Mexico and the greater areas, right? So that's how I kind of came on board here. It was kind of a culmination of an experience of education and practical experience. And, I really liked the idea of giving back to the community. I know it's very easy to be skeptical in our lives and things like that, but I really like the idea of service and servicing, in some ways, our country, being a part of this. I don't think anybody goes to work, guys. I don't want to surprise you, but I don't think anyone goes to work for the Forest Service to make $1 million. So
I talked to plenty of Forest Service people. I know that's not the case.
Yeah, we're rolling. If you've seen our mountains, but I really wanted the idea. I really like the idea of giving back to my community, and that, in this regard, is both as a nation, but also giving back to the tribal communities that have called Colorado and Western Kansas home for years and years and years. I thought maybe I can come out here and do some good work. First and foremost for tribes, by learning about tribal histories and tribal cultures in our landscapes out here, and also obviously for our taxpayers who support the maintenance of our national forests, national grasslands, and the animals and plants and all these things that roam upon them, if you will.
Okay. So I guess the big question that comes to mind, and when I'm out exploring various parts of the Western U.S., it's hard not to run into elements of Native American indigenous history out here. It's hard not to run it. I mean, those of us who live here know Pikes Peak has name Tava, which is the original name that it was given by, I believe, the Ute Indians. And if you go into the Four Corners region, obviously a lot of indigenous there. You go down to Mesa Verde National Park, you see a lot of that. It's hard not to run into that, especially it seems to be more prevalent in the Western U.S., but I know, like you said, Florida has it. I grew up in New Jersey. My high school was named after an indigenous tribe, so it's and still is to this day. They haven't changed it. So it's hard not to run into that. But what does the Forest Service look to do with having somebody in your position working for them? Is it to we said you're a tribal relations person, But what is it that the Forest Service wants to do with having somebody in your position on board? What are they? Is it relationships? Is it history? Is it education? Is it all these things I haven't even thought of? What's the idea there?
Well, first and foremost, I think you hit the nail right on the head there, Bob, which is that when we look around in North America, first of all, we could say Colorado, Kansas, United States, whatever. All of these lines are kind of arbitrary because really when we look around, all of North America is native North America. These are all indigenous lands. They were native lands well before the United States came around. And now that we're here, right, it's good to know that. It's good to understand that these places mean things to people who are still here today. The biggest thing I always taught when I was teaching, as I came up, you teach courses at the university as you were getting your doctorate and things like that. The biggest thing I always try to emphasize to folks, if there's one lesson I wanted people to know, is like Native people are still here. They are part of this community, and the things that we do matter to indigenous communities. And for me, whenever I'm out hiking or things like that, and I've spent a lot of time when I came out here just very initially, because I felt like part of my job was to learn these landscapes as fast as I could. And obviously I've been out here 7 months or so. I have not mastered the landscapes here. I've tried to visit as much as I possibly can, but I'm far from an expert on these landscapes. But I felt like it was part of my due diligence to serve these tribes by learning about these landscapes as best I possibly could. And this will be something that I continue to do as long as I am here in the Forest Service, wherever it is that I do, right? That's just kind of how I operate. Now, to answer your question, like, what is it we're trying to do here with this particular position with the tribal liaison, right? I think in recognizing that all of these lands are native lands is a really good first step, right? But how do we make sure that we are doing right by the people who have always claimed these lands since, like I said, before the establishment of the Forest Service, before there was a Jason Herbert or anything else like that, right? And that means having someone dedicated to listening to tribes, to talking to tribes, and not just sending out an email or a fax or a phone call or anything like that, but really going through the real efforts of establishing relationships. That means going to tribes, learning about tribal histories, what places mean things, why they mean things, and what's at stake by making sure that we are administering and managing these landscapes in ways that are appropriate to the numbers of indigenous communities, not just in our forest, but any other forest, right? And I really don't think that we're going too far out of our way to do so. I think everybody wins here, whether or not you're an indigenous person, whether or not you're an American citizen, whether or not you're one of our visitors from maybe another country who want to come see Pikes Peak or these other amazing spaces here, right? I think that we all win when we talk to Native people about what these landscapes should look like and how they should operate, and what we need to get right when we are trying to make sure that trees are growing the right way, or that we're not putting roads in spaces that might disturb something or anything like that. So there's an aspect of that, and I'll tell you frankly, part of the other job, like you said, is actually education, and not just for our folks who come out here. Now, right now, we're looking at trying to redo our interpretive signs to tell more and better stories, and that not just Native stories, right? All of these stories about all the people. Colorado is an incredibly diverse space, right? We've got people from all over everywhere, including California, as I'm told is like a thing here.
Not as much as Texans.
I know. I was not going to say the T word. We love you, Texas. Yeah, it's fine.
I'm
it's fine.
kidding.
Bring your barbecue. It's fine. But we all benefit. So part of what we're trying to do is tell all of these diverse histories of these landscapes, right? Ultimately, what we're doing is telling the story of a space, of a place, whether it's a river or valley or grassland or something like that, the people who lived upon them, whenever, right? So that's part of it, educating the people who come to our national forest so they can really enjoy these spaces even better, right? I think that when I'm out hiking, and it's whether or not I'm on top of the Spanish Peaks and I know, wait a second, these are Comanche landscapes, right? For me, that adds something to it. And it maybe affects the way that I engage with the landscape a little bit more. I treat it with a reverence and respect, that I say, hey, wait, these places are important, right? So there's part of that, because I like to know the history, but that's great. And then part of what I try to do is also teach to our Forest Service personnel. And I can tell you that when I arrived here, what I found, and this was really great. Again, going back to this, it's very easy to be skeptical at life, right?
Mhm.
But when I arrived here, what I can tell you is that the people that I came to work with out here at the United States Forest Service, and we're based in Pueblo for anyone who doesn't know, the supervisor's office here, and there's a bunch of other districts involved, right? All the folks I talked to were really interested in learning about Native history and landscapes, or how do people use fire out here? How do we do this? Now, I don't have all the answers, right? No, by any means, but part of my job is to help share that knowledge with our Forest Service personnel. So then when they engage folks out in the field, and if you guys are listening to this podcast, you go out in the woods and you hike around, you talk to our Forest Service staff, right? And they could say, hey, yeah, you're on top of Pikes Peak. Did you know this mountain is sacred to multiple tribes, right? Just little things like that we can all share and learn and things like that. So there is certainly a component of teaching that is important to this. But again, the biggest aspect of what it is that I'm really trying to do here is ensure that Native voices are being heard in the administration of these spaces. And that means talking to tribes, getting to know people on a personal level, so that I can say, hey, wait a second, these lands are important. We'd like, for instance, this tribe would like, I don't want to put words in any particular tribe's mouth here, but like this tribe or this community would like to see these lands managed in this thing, or there are concerns about timber over here, or fish populations, or any number of things, right? We've got a very diverse landscape here, and the needs and concerns of us are also very diverse. So I just want to make sure that when I talk to tribes, I'm first and foremost listening and respecting their concerns. And then I can help relay that information back and forth to leadership and the people who are the decision makers out here, who are very vested and very much want to ensure that we're doing right by tribes. And that's the big part of it.
Okay, so I'm glad that you're bringing this stuff, people's awareness to this. I like that, it's a big thing about people's awareness, but whether it's the public or Forest Service staff, history is rampant with how the indigenous, the Native Americans, the Native people here were poorly treated as, you talked about cattle in Florida, but let's just look at cattle throughout the Western U.S. and the bison throughout the Western U.S. and how that was co-opted for the non-Native people who came here and, and were trampling all over Native lands and displacing Native people. I think sometimes it's just people just don't know what they don't know, if that makes sense. So I think it seems to me that part of your thing is to just let people know a history of what's going on either whether the public or the Forest Service. Is that a really distilled version of that? I mean,
I hope so.
Yeah.
Part of my job as a historian is to celebrate these stories, or to tell these stories, celebrate the people who live here today by talking about history. And look, realistically, history is going to make you feel uncomfortable. There's a lot of great stuff to celebrate in history. There's also a lot of stuff that makes us go, oh man, that was awful. And look, we can't talk about Native history. The whole reason why I'm here is because the United States engaged in a series of destruction, of genocidal wars, of attempted extirpation, of violent removal of indigenous people from their homelands in the United States. And that is not, to the listeners here, I'm not telling you that to make you feel guilty. And I would always teach this to my students. That's not to make you feel guilty. You're not guilty of this. You didn't do this, but you are responsible. And what I mean by that is responsible for learning about the past so we can create a better future. And that's the whole point of history itself, not just say Native history or World War II or the Roman Empire, or any number of kinds of histories. We learn about the past so we can create a better present and a better future for the people who follow along, right? So those are the stories we're trying to tell, and they're not all negative, right? Or anything like that. We don't want to get necessarily but we just say, hey, this is the past. These are why things happened the way they did. Now, how do we make a better place, right? So for me, I've come at this from an angle of celebration, because when I want to celebrate these landscapes, these majestic, amazing spaces that we have here, but also the peoples who have always been here. I've been very fortunate in my short time here to befriend a lot of folks from tribes as I've started to learn tribal histories here. And again, the process of learning tribal histories and things like that would take a lifetime. take more than a lifetime, right? So I hope to engage tribes, learn what they would like for us to share, and do that in a way that is respectful to the tribe's histories, in a way that we can all kind of take part in, creating these spaces that we know of today.
I'm reminded of the old adage that those who fail to learn history are doomed to repeat it, and it seems like the way we avoid going retrograde, so to speak, or going back to doing things that weren't the best way to do things, is to not know how what we did wrong to begin with. Kind of I think probably the best way to put that in my inarticulate way of doing it.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So look, good history makes you uncomfortable. Cool. That's how you learn from things, right? So we talk about these kinds of things. And again, at the same time, there's so much we can learn from the tribal elders I've had the opportunity to learn from, who are willing to share with us about these landscapes, to share with other tribal members, and also like with folks like myself and yourself and listeners who are not tribal members. Hey, this is what this tribe would like for us to know about these spaces and things like that. And then, of course, there are also things that, are not for us to do. And that's also a thing that I try to respect when I'm working with tribes. It's also like, hey, there are certain things, that I don't want to know. When it comes to tribal histories and things like that, things that are important to tribes and stuff. So I'm trying to maintain a respectful balance of, hey, how can I serve your needs as a tribe or as a people? And that goes beyond actually my experience working for tribes, but also for our, like I said, our visitors, guests, stakeholders, and so forth, right? How can I serve your needs and, share with you these landscapes?
How has your reception been with the tribal leader? I mean, like you said, you've only been here a short period of time. Mm-hmm. You have a history of working with tribes, but not in this part of the country.
Sure.
So how has your reception been with the tribal leaders in this part of the country? I recognize you've only been here a short time. Have they been pretty receptive? I know that they can be a little distrustful and a little closed and very slow to open up. But how's it worked for you?
Well, the thing I always talk to folks about, and again, is that in a lot of ways, tribal members are no different than anybody else. If you come from, and this is not unique to working with tribes, coming from outside any community. Bob, you're from Jersey. I'm from the South. People outside my small town in Murray, Kentucky, are like, you show up, you're like, you're going to get invited to church or whatever, right? But at first you're going to get the eyebrow, like, who's that person at the diner, whatever, right? So I would tell you this stuff. I have been blown away by how open folks have been out to working, to greeting me and welcoming me to talk to them about the forest and things like that. And I would tell you this, and a lot of that is because of the administration's focus now, real focus on working with tribes. This has been something that this current administration has really tried to do, which is say, hey, we really do want to work with tribes and work in the tribe's best interests and things like that. And I hope that my approach when I go out to folks, which is to treat them like I treat anybody else. I've got a PhD in history and blah, blah, blah. Guys, that doesn't mean anything realistically. It means I went through and I spent a whole lot of time and I spent a whole lot of money getting a degree, right? But really, it means that, I did some work at a university, but when it comes to getting to know someone from, say, the Southern Ute Indian tribe or Mountain Ute Indian tribe or Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma, anything like that. And those are just some of the tribes that have vested interests here in Colorado. There are multiple tribes that I encourage everybody to research. But you go in with a sense of humility, right? And because I'm not the expert here. I am a guest on native lands. At least that's how I try to understand my space here. And again, the big thing you guys will continue to hear me say is service, service, service. My job is a service. My job is a service first and foremost, in my mind, to the indigenous communities who call Colorado and Western Kansas home, but also to the taxpayers and then our guests who come onto our landscape. And if that comes through, I feel like most people, whether you're tribal, if you're from Jersey or from the Kentucky or anywhere else, even from Texas, have a pretty good BS detector, right? Yeah. So they know if you're serious and whether or not you are um, whether or not you mean what you say. And I hope that I hope that comes across, that I'm genuine in my desire to be of service to communities across the country.
So when you're doing this work with the Forest Service and you're talking to these indigenous tribes, these tribal leaders, and learning more about them, is the goal? We keep talking about, why is Forest Service doing this? And I'm getting a really good. I mean, you're really explaining it well why you're out there. Everything we're doing out here, all these Forest Service lands are, native lands of some type. Is the long-term big picture goal, is it maybe to there to become some policy changes within the Forest Service as to how the Forest Service does its mission moving forward? Is there going to be some policy changes built in? Is what you learn from dealing with these tribal leaders going to become ingrained in policy within the Forest Service at some point?
I can't really speak to big picture policy issues. Like I said, I'm a federal government employee now for 7 months or things like that and whatnot. I would tell you that my practical experience as a taxpayer, policy changes daily, right? On any number of things, whether it's Forest Service, military, defense, whatever, healthcare, whatever, right? Here's the realistic thing that I hope is doing, right? I really hope that through it, I was hired to ensure that relationships between the federal government, specifically the Forest Service, specifically Pike-San, Isabel National Forest, and Cimarron and Comanche National Grasslands, are improved. And that's what I want. I can't really focus, in my mind, Bob, on big picture policy things and things like that. All I want to do is ensure that when I go out to talk to folks, any number of folks from any number of tribes with vested interests here in Colorado, that their voices are being heard here in the Forest Service, that I'm relaying their interests and their needs to the Forest Service, to my leadership here, and also relaying Forest Service plans, strategies, goals, and things like that back to the tribes, so that again, everybody wins here when we communicate. Let's break this down to the most basic relationship. The most basic important thing in any relationship is good communication, right? So that's what I'm trying to do, is try to make sure that lines of communication are open, they are clear, they are honest, built on trust. And from there, we get a really great, healthy ecosystem as a result that everybody can enjoy. That's the basic thing. So if that's the policy, hey, everybody talk, and we get a great forest out of it. Cool. I mean, that's where I come from.
I'm seeing some correlation between your position and my good friend Jennifer Peterson, who works down in your office there, and she is the relationship person with other agencies with the Forest Service.
Sure.
And I've had her on the podcast, and I've known Jennifer for years. And I see some similarities. She's dealing with other organizations and communicating back and forth with the Forest Service. You're doing the same thing with the tribal leaders to make sure they're heard, and that the communications goes back and forth from them to the Forest Service, and the Forest Service back to them. I think for a lot of us have this perception of the federal government as being this big bureaucratic nightmare, that there's no communications, but you're proving that that's not the case, just the way Jennifer's proven that's not the case. There is lines of communication that are open, and it seems like the government's making more effort to open up more of those lines of communication.
Well, it has to be. Look, we do have a big federal government. It's a big gosh darn country. Yeah. We're one of the largest countries in the history of history, right?
Right.
And that only works if we get people talking to each other. We can look at government and say, oh my gosh, there's all this blah, blah, blah. And there is, right? There's a whole bunch of everything. You look around, there's all government kind of stuff everywhere. At the same time, that doesn't have to be a negative thing, because the folks I've worked with, folks like Jennifer, right? Folks like my supervising officers and the line officers, and all the way down to our support staff at the Forest Service, it's all about an idea of service here, right? So yeah, talking to one another and so forth, that just helps everybody win.
So I guess my second question would be, and I think you kind of hinted at this with education, how would this affect we're a recreation podcast. We talk about hiking and camping and biking and all that kind of good stuff. How would this, do you see, affect the recreational user? Do you think that interpretive signage may change? Do you think maybe the layout of trails may change, the location of campsites? Where do you envision the knowledge you get from this maybe affecting the recreational user?
Well, hopefully across the board, and hopefully all in a positive way, right? And by that I mean, sure, absolutely. Let's put some more signs up there, so our guests and visitors say, hey, what's the native name of this mountain, and whose lands are these, right? Absolutely, that's a cool thing. I like history, right? Like, who's here, right? What are the native names of these trees, or what's been used here before? Why is this important, or why should I respect this, right? When we create these new signs and tell these better stories, in cooperation with tribes, and that's the big thing that I'm working on right now, is working with tribes to create new interpretive signs, written in cooperation with tribes. So, hey, these tribes can tell us, hey, these are the stories they would like to tell and share, right? This is an opportunity for everybody to win here. So there's that. And we go out in the woods, you see these things, puts them into context, right? And this is why when I'm out here and I'm looking at this tree and I'm learning about all these, so guys, the Ponderosa is currently my new favorite tree since I moved to Colorado. I love, and they call them pondos out here. Yep. Oh man, it's so cool, right? So I love that tree. I love the Douglas fir. It's another one.
Have you smelled the vanilla smell coming off of Ponderosa yet?
I have, actually. So I had the opportunity to get out and look at some Ponderosa trees with some tribal members from the Southern Ute Indian tribe back when I first arrived here. It was just so cool, and getting to learn this is what we might refer to as a grandfather tree or something like that. And you can see where its descendants, that tree's descendants, because of where the seeds and things like that would distribute and so forth. So you can kind of trace the lineage. And again, that's about understanding the forest and things like that. And again, that was something that was told, hey, you can share this information, right? So that's cool. Also, okay, so let's talk about hiking or things like that. Again, these lands have existed well before they were called Pike-San, Isabel National Forest, Comanche, Cimarron National Grasslands. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of words, right? So these lands have existed before their current label, right? People have lived upon these lands. They have done all the things that you do in your life. You have you grow up, you fall in love. Sometimes you go to war. Sometimes you get divorced. Sometimes you hunt. Sometimes you pass away. Sometimes you're buried here. Things like that. All of these lands are sacred because of the activities the person lives throughout their life, right? So understanding that we don't want to disturb spaces that would be sacred to someone, just like I don't want anyone going through disturbing where my grandparents are at rest and at peace now. Same ways like that. So understanding, hey, these are spaces that we probably shouldn't be, but you know what? We got 3.5 million acres over here. There's plenty of room for everybody out here to go and enjoy these forest grasslands. So how do we do that, right? So talking to tribes helps us understand where these things should go, but also, hey, after we have a fire, what should be growing here?
Right.
Or what kind of trees should be here, or what kind of animals should be here, or anything like that. I think there's always, at least in my life, there's always a hesitancy to when we hear change, right, or anything like that. And these are not major changes we're talking about. What we're talking about are additions. Realistically, how do we incorporate native voices into native landscapes? So whether it comes from ensuring that we've got some more signs out there, we've got better trails, that we've got that we're talking to native people to understand about a concept called traditional ecological knowledge, which here's the super short version of that is native science, right? Native people have been managing these landscapes since there have been native people, since there have been landscapes, since forever, right? So why, when we walk around Colorado, we walk around Western Kansas, or anywhere else in the United States, whether Pisgah National Forest or Ocala National Forest in home of Florida, or anywhere else, right? All of these landscapes, Everglades National Park, were created by native folks, managed by native folks, right? So understanding that and then incorporating those continued management techniques and practices into their continued management just makes sense. So that's what we're trying to do, is just better manage these landscapes so everybody can enjoy them that much better?
I'm thinking that this can only make the outdoor experience better for people. I've hiked in places where I've hiked a trail that was obviously at one time a road and now is a trail, and you're 2 miles back, 3 miles back, 5 miles back, and there's an interpretive sign there. And you're thinking, I didn't expect to see this. And then you learn something about where you're at. I'm thinking about down in the, well, not far from you, down in the San Isabel area where I hiked a trail once, and there's an old road, and I stumbled upon the remnants of an old building, and there was an interpretive sign there. So, well, this used to be an old lodge, and this is what was here. And it's always exciting to run into these. And then you run into a trail name, a trail marker it's named after somebody, and you sit there and go, well, it's obviously somebody's name, but what's the history? How did we get to this? Why? And sometimes there's a sign that tells you, and then a lot of times there's not, and you're sitting there going, I want to know more about this. Who was this person? How did we get here? So I'm thinking that anything that we have out there, whether it relate to, here's how the native peoples use this land. Here's why they built the trail to the top of this mountain, because there was a lookout point and they could see where the bison herds were, or anything like that. I love seeing that kind of stuff out there. And I'm thinking, if this is how we get there, because you have a position like you do and you're talking to the tribal people, this is a great thing for outdoor recreation.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I was telling you earlier, I like to hike too. And seeing a sign is great because I get lost a lot. So I see a sign, I'm like, okay, someone will find me somehow. So I sit and whimper for a little while. In a lot of ways, right? I would encourage our listeners to think about these interpretive signs in some ways as treasure maps. Now, by that, Dr. Herbert is not saying go outside with a shovel and start digging stuff up. That is not what I'm saying.
Don't do that.
But what I am saying is that these national landscapes are national treasures, right? I don't know how you could go out and see San Isabel National Forest, which is currently my personal favorite of the four lands. Love San Is.
I don't disagree with you.
It's so pretty. And all these places are pretty, right? But how you can walk out to these spaces and see grasslands. My grandfather passed away a few years ago, and we're from Kentucky, and I'd go out on his boat in Kentucky Lake and we'd go out to catch catfish. And he's a very religious guy, and I'm not, but that's cool. I can still appreciate it. And he said, I don't know how you could look out here and not see some kind of divine creation, right? And so my grandfather was always like that. And it always inspired with me the idea that these spaces are all special and wonderful, should be treasured. So, these signs help, so interpretive signs will help us to understand why they are, right? What kind of animals live here? Or like if I come across a thing and I see that mastodon were here, oh, cool, right? Yeah. Or I see that this is the home. I've learned about pika since I've been here. The little mice,
little tiny mice at high altitude.
I've been on top of Pike's Peak and they're like this little thing. Or when I was trying to climb the Spanish peaks, I had all these marmots laughing at me, so seeing the signs.
The same marmots that laughed at me when I went up there.
Oh my gosh, they were like, you thought you were going to come up here, did you? Oh, you thought this was a short hike? No, my friend. Yeah. I learned a new word, scree.
Yeah.
And I learned that if it is scree, it is not for me. Boy, that stuff is tough. Respect to you guys here in Colorado, Okay. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, these signs are great because they do help us understand the landscapes and again why they're important, and just add to the importance or the enjoyment of the whole place.
It's one of the things you pointed out was when you're talking about with your grandfather, and how he saw, he was a religious person. That's wonderful. I've been to a number of events where, and it seems like this has gathered a little bit of steam when we do something in the national forest here. And I'm thinking one of the most recent ones is when we opened the new Summit House on top of Pike's Peak. And there was a great effort to bring in tribal leaders to be part of the, I don't know what you want to call it, their spiritual blessing of the building and the peak. And they talked about their, what it meant to them, which I think it's so good that we have them coming to these things that occur, in our national forest. But I like that they refer to, however you want to call your higher power, they refer to that as the creator.
Mhm.
And I think that is really connecting them with going back to how everything came back. I love that that's the term that they use to refer to a higher power, to the lands and to all this stuff. I really like how they do that. I think it's just, it seems like a great non-divisive way to connect people to however you want to refer to a higher power.
Yeah, so uh, I'm glad you brought that up because we actually had a day here on Indigenous Peoples Day this last year in 2023 where we had a sunrise ceremony blessing where elders came out from a number of tribes and offered a blessing not only to their tribes and to the mountain, but to anyone who wanted to take a moment and partake in this. It was real special, and I hope that they do it again next year. It was very early. For those of you who've been on top of Pike's Peak, I've been up there 4 or 5 times now, and I've not gotten used to that drive. That is still weirds me out. Only this time it was in the pitch black.
With no guardrails.
Yeah, the point is that's different. But I would tell you this. There was certainly an aspect when I took this job, when I was debating taking this job. I reached out to a friend of mine and I talked to her and I said, hey, I'm not Native. What am I doing taking this job? Am I doing right by this? She said, Jason, Creator made you too. Maybe this is the role. So I can't speak to Native. I can't speak to really anybody's religion, right? But I don't know how you can go to any of these spaces in Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico, really anywhere in North America, and not find something deep inside of us. I think that's probably the reason why people are listening to your podcast, because they also, in the process of hiking or paddling or getting lost in the woods, whatever, lost in themselves, even, if you will, find something about these spaces that touches them deep inside. And I think that's the reason why we try to protect it. And in this regard, working with tribes helps to do those things too.
We're dealing with, as you're no doubt aware, you haven't been here that long, but I'm sure that you've heard this from your office mates at your office, the people who work next to, the people in the field, that we're dealing with in this region, certainly in the Pike-San Isabel National Forest, a huge population of users. It's just gone up. I mean, I've been here 30 some odd years. We saw this coming. COVID made it accelerate probably a good 10 years faster than anybody was preparing for. And how we deal with the huge increase in users out here. How do we deal with parking and people on the trails and the different user groups and that kind of stuff? What I don't hear us talking about is how we are affecting the native population that was here before. How are we doing this and respecting their heritage and their what's the word? I'm trying to think of the right word, and I'm kind of, my mind is kind of failing me. But how are we respecting their history here as we are preparing for how to accommodate more and more users in our national forest?
Well, a couple different things. I'm always hesitant to speak in broad terms when it comes to like Native or Indigenous or anything like that, simply because every Indigenous community is different. Just like every town in North America is different. Every family. Indigenous communities are just as diverse as any other community in the United States. There are folks from everywhere, and what ties people together is a sense of kinship. And in a lot of senses, in Indigenous communities, it's a tie to the land, right? So those are great questions that we should be asking. How does the way in which I engage Pikes Peak or Pike National Forest or Cimarron National Grassland affect the people who call these places home, who call these places sacred, whose identity as a human are tied to these landscapes? These are really important and good questions to be asked. And I think it's good that these are starting to be on the table. Look, realistically, we talked upon this a little bit earlier. We're sitting here because the United States engaged in a massive act of colonization, a genocide at times, displacement of Native peoples from their homelands, right? All of these things happen. after, say, quote unquote, those wars stopped, after the bullets stopped flying, if you will, right? Violence on the Native communities continued to happen in the ways in which the United States engaged the landscape. And by that, I mean, when the bullets stop flying, that's when the dredges come into the Everglades. That's when the dams start going up in the Pacific Northwest. That's when the roads and mines start coming into Colorado and California and things like that. Because what happens is when you change the landscape, you affect damage onto a culture, and when you kill the culture, you kill the people, right? That's why it's so important. If you're listening in, that's why it's so important for us to get these lands right, because violence takes a lot of forms. And it's not just all guns and things like that. It can come in the form of a bulldozer or a dredge or any number of things, right? So now that we've got that part out of the way, it's important that we ask these questions, because let's be respectful of these landscapes. Let's not litter. Let's not go off-roading on spots where, in the short time I've been here, I've come to understand trails, things like that, are chosen and designed for reasons. Where there are no trails, where there are like no biking trails or things like that, are also there for a reason, right? So be respectful of what we're all working towards. Federal government, like, we all work for the taxpayers. You're trying to create the best possible usage of these landscapes. Like, conservation literally refers to the wise usage of lands and resources, right? So we're trying to do that. So that's what I say. When you're going out into Pike National Forest, absolutely enjoy being on top of that mountain. Enjoy looking at that landscape. And if you feel something deep inside you, enjoy that. If you want to shout, absolutely, right? But don't leave stuff behind. Just be understanding that these spaces are more than just about yourself. But I don't think that these things are hard to do. I think we can all benefit from that shared knowledge and just that perspective of saying, hey, I'm in someone's, when I'm on top of Pikes Peak, I'm in someone's church.
Right.
When I'm over on top of any number of mountains on top at Blanca Peak, I'm in someone's church. I'm in someone's holy land. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Absolutely smile. Go there, enjoy it. Other folks enjoy it. But just keep that in mind. And that just means, be a decent human. That's what Dr. Herbert says. Be a decent human.
Hike up that trail and enjoy the view, and just
absolutely
take it in. And I'm thinking back in the day when we were building a railroad across the country, and the effect that had. And it's not to say that progress wasn't going to happen, and things, all these things were going to come. Technology and the mechanized era was going to come and change things anyway. But I hope that now that when we look at things, we looked at them a little differently than we did 150, 200 years ago, and probably take a better view of how we do things nowadays. Maybe we shouldn't do things quite the way we used to do things.
Because you can do a thing doesn't mean that you necessarily should do a thing. And I think that hopefully in this regard of hiring and training these tribal liaisons in positions like myself, by reaching out to indigenous communities, we can maybe undo a lot of that damage that was done, hopefully, by integrating indigenous voices into the ways in which we do stuff. And it signals like maybe a different turn. This will not happen overnight, ladies and gentlemen. And it's not supposed to. If we're really serious about doing right by indigenous communities who are also Americans, right? These processes can't just happen over the course of a couple months or a couple of years. This has to be a lasting thing where we work over the course of generations to affect positive change across the United States.
This has been an enlightening and I've greatly enjoyed this conversation with you. We've had a great time here, but I think I'm way over the amount of time that we had for this. I really, really appreciate it. I want to have you back on later as you move into your position a little bit more and you do more work and get more familiar and get out and see more of this beautiful national forest we have here. I want to talk to you again. It's been such a pleasure having you on here. I know that there's probably something you wanted to say that I probably didn't ask you about. This is your turn to, what have I not asked you that you want to tell us on this podcast?
Oh my goodness! See that's always a tough
and you
thing.
can have all the time you want.
I'll get off of here, and then I'll be like, the thing I want to ask you is where I get good barbecue up here. I'll be like, where I have found Front Range Barbecue out there in Colorado Springs. Outstanding. Listen, the Southern
barbecue is very good.
I respect. I was out there. I don't have any questions. The only thing I would tell your listeners is how much of a privilege it is to serve you guys out here in this landscape. I really mean this. Getting to know folks out here, to spend time out there, whether I'm at South Platte or whether I'm up near any number of places, Canyon City or Western Kansas or anything like that. It's a real honor to be able to spend this time and work for our stakeholders here, Indigenous communities, American taxpayers, our guests here, all that kind of stuff. I really do mean that. That's not BS. Believe me, they don't pay me enough to say glorious things or anything like that. I really do take that to heart. So, and I hope you guys know, and the thing I found, because I come from outside the Forest Service, I've only been here for a short time, was that so many of the people who work inside the Forest Service take that to heart too. They really do care. They really enjoy this. We don't do this for any other reason than the fact that we love these landscapes too. It's our great privilege to be able to help manage these spaces, to make them available to you guys, to us, because I go hiking too, right? It's cool. So I'm really enjoying my time out here. People in Colorado have been very welcoming to me thus far. And yeah, so if you have questions, you can find us. And I know, Bob, you're on Twitter, right?
Yes,
sir. So you can find me on Twitter too at Herbert History is if you want to find me out there and ask any questions about the Forest Service or anything like that, or come into any one of our Forest Service stations at ranger districts and come talk to folks. So I see people all the time coming to talk, ask questions about any number of things. You see Forest Service personnel out in the woods, by all means, flag them down. They love to talk. They go out in the woods and commune. So yeah, absolutely go talk to them. So they're very lonely people. Yeah. Is that bad? No. So
no, that's great.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Hey, listen, I've really enjoyed it. Being out here is a real thrill for me. Colorado and Western Kansas are amazing spaces. The people out here are just wonderful. So yeah, that's me.
Jason, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I wish we had a chance to do this in person, but it didn't work out. We're going to do that. Next time. We're going to go hiking, and I expect that when you and I go hiking, I am going to learn more in a few miles of hiking than I probably learned in my 30 plus years of living here.
You will learn what it's like for a man from Florida to come and just draw in deep breaths as he still acclimates to this elevation. Guys, that is no joke. If you're coming to Florida, it's the flattest state in the union. Oh my gosh, that's been a learning curve. But yeah, absolutely, we can do that.
Yeah, what it's like to take a deep breath and not inhale a lung full of gnats and mosquitoes would be the
I do like that. I do like the lack of mosquitoes here. That's kind of cool.
You got here kind of late, so you probably missed most of the summer here. You'll probably find that it's a relatively bug-free environment.
Yeah. There are perks. There are perks to being in Colorado,
and certainly humidity-free too. So
I know.
Yeah, you're going to learn to love it. As a kid from New Jersey who moved out here a long time ago, and then I go back east every once in a while in June, and I'm like, what in the heck was I thinking? Going back there, it's summer, there's ticks and mosquitoes and flies and chiggers and all that other kind of stuff. Yeah. Like, I'm getting out of there. I'm going back. I'm going back west. I do have one last thing I would tell you. Sure. If you are interested in learning more about the indigenous communities who call Colorado home, there are dozens of tribes with ancestral and present day ties to Colorado and Western Kansas. The best thing you can do is go to the tribal websites. The best thing if you want to learn Native history, the best thing you can do is talk to Native people. And every tribal website you'll go to will have sections on their history where you can learn more. Many tribes have their own museums and things like that. Southern Ute comes to mind right now, has a Southern Ute Indian tribe out near Durango, has a wonderful museum out there that you can visit. So by all means, also we've got some really wonderful collections on our history museums here in Colorado as well. But the very first thing I would say, if you want to learn more about Native history, go to Native folks, go to the communities, go for the websites. And if you would like to know more about that, you would just find me on Twitter and I'll point you in the direction if you need to. And yeah, but do that. Jason, again, a wonderful experience having you on here. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast, and I appreciate the work that your public affairs people did to make this happen. They're so great at navigating the I'll be nice. Well, it's not their fault. I mean, they're great at navigating what their higher ups tell them they have to do to make these things happen. So I really appreciate that. And Dr. Jason Herbert, who is the Tribal Liaison for I'm just going to say the Pike-San Isabel National Forest. The rest of it's too long. I said it
the
once.
Woods, Bob. For the woods.
For the woods, for the forest,
for the woods.
For all that stuff out to the west of us and to the south of us and to the east of us, all that land out there that belongs to the Forest Service. It has just been a wonder having you on here. I hope we get to meet up and do a little hiking together. And if you're, next time you're up this way and you're looking for a little hike to go on, ring me up and we'll go have a good time. And I'll show you some trails you haven't seen before, make you breathe hard, and you can tell me why we're up there.
Question marks. Thank you. That's awesome. You got to play it. Thank you so much, Bob. This has been a real pleasure.
All right. Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for listening to the Outdoors with Hiking Bob podcast. Hey, everybody, before you go, and thanks for listening to my podcast, don't forget to check out Stevie and Will on Chronology's Functional Wellness podcast. You can tune in for tips on slow aging, functional wellness, and healing through food, movement, and a healthy lifestyle. Check it out here at studio809podcast.com.